Her journal ended mid-sentence. No goodbye, no warning. Just a line that trailed off like breath caught in fear. His final words were never spoken aloud. They were folded, trembling, into a locket, sealed shut, and buried beside their bones. In July of 1996, Jake and Allison Dwyer vanished from their beach rental without a trace. 25 years later, what the ocean gave back left even the police speechless. Before we go deeper into the disappearance of Jake and Allison Dwyer and the chilling evidence, the ocean returned 25 years later, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that others forgot, the ones buried by time, silence, and sea. It's just one click for you, but it helps us uncover the truth, one haunting mystery at a time. Thank you for being part of this search. The tide rolls in, soft and ceaseless, brushing the sand with fingers made of foam. Beyond the dunes, where the horizon bleeds into ash-blue sky, the waves whisper secrets to the wind. A gull cries in the distance. Closer, nestled at the edge of the coastline, stands a small beach house, white paint peeling in patches, shutters slightly crooked, a porch swing moving faintly though there's no one sitting on it. The kind of place built for laughter, ocean breezes, sunburns, and the slow unraveling of city-tight nerves. But tonight, it is silent. Inside, the light is dim, not from neglect, but from something quieter, something more intimate. The soft flicker of candlelight dances along the walls, throwing shadows that sway like ghosts too tired to haunt. A single candle on the nightstand burns low, its wax curling over the edge of the dish like a falling wave. The room smells faintly of sea salt and old linen. There's no music, no voices, just the creak of wood and the eternal hush of the Pacific murmuring through cracked windows. On the bed lies a half-packed suitcase. Inside, a pair of denim shorts, a book with a dog-eared page, a camera with sand caught in its strap, a soft cotton shirt, still faintly carrying the scent of perfume. On the nightstand, 2 empty glasses rest beside a bottle of cheap red wine, its cork missing, its contents 3/4 gone. The glasses are side by side, touching. One has a smudge of lipstick, the other is clean. In the kitchenette, a plate of scrambled eggs has gone cold. A fork sits in the sink, speckled with drying yolk. The radio, an old-fashioned thing with a bent antenna, hums with low static but no station. The door is locked from the inside. A single photo is pinned to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a seashell. It shows a man and a woman, both smiling, windblown and happy, framed by dunes and dune grass. Their eyes squint against the Sunday. The kind of photo people take when they're trying to remember a moment forever. The kind that becomes unbearable when memory is all that's left. And then nothing. No note. No blood. No sign of struggle. The kind of emptiness that isn't loud or violent. The kind that seeps in like fog. That leaves behind the smallest trace. An open drawer, a strand of hair on the pillow, the smell of sunscreen on a towel. 25 years would pass before anyone knew what really happened in that house. But for now, all that remains is the silence. And the sound of the waves. In July of 1996, a couple disappeared without a trace. They arrived just after noon, the sun caught in a curtain of overcast light that painted the coast in soft gray hues. The rental sat like a secret among the dunes, modest, weather-worn, and framed by wild grasses that bent with the breeze. Jake carried the bags, Allison carried the camera. Both carried a quiet hope, tucked carefully behind tired eyes and new wedding bands. Jake Dwyer was 34. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that didn't demand a room but gently anchored it. He had been a paramedic in Portland for 11 years, first on the ambulance, later in the trauma unit. He had learned to speak softly, listen harder, and never take for granted the stillness between sirens. But the job had left its mark. Sleeplessness, a slight tremor in his hands, and that certain kind of gaze people wear after witnessing too many endings. Allison, younger by 5 years, had met Jake during a first aid course at the college where she worked. She taught English literature, loved worn books and thunderstorms, and hated how quiet the apartment felt after her younger sister died in 1992. Grief, for her, was not loud. It crept. It lingered. And it built walls she didn't know were there until Jake walked through them without flinching. They weren't supposed to get married, not that soon. Not after only 9 months of knowing each other. But when Jake proposed, it wasn't with a ring. It was with a letter, handwritten. Folded into the pages of her favorite novel, he had written, "I don't want to outrun what haunts us. I want to sit with it beside you." They chose the Oregon coast for their honeymoon not because it was glamorous, but because it was quiet. No crowds, no schedules, just ocean air and the rhythmic pulse of waves to fill the silence. The listing for the rental had promised a private retreat ideal for couples. The owner hadn't mentioned the creaking floorboards or the thin windows that let the wind sing through the house at night. But Jake loved it. Said the imperfections made it feel lived in. Allison agreed, said it reminded her of the summer homes in old novels, where nothing happened and everything did. Their first days were slow, filled with long walks down fog-lined beaches, breakfast at a diner that served burnt toast with a smile, and evenings curled on the couch reading aloud to each other. Jake would make up endings to the books. Allison would photograph the sky at dusk, chasing light like it could teach her something new. There were no arguments, no raised voices, just laughter, soft touches, and the kind of peace neither had known in years. But there were shadows too. Small ones. Allison's sudden glances over her shoulder when they walked. Jake's hesitations when she asked about his dreams. Both of them thinking they were hiding their pain better than they were. Trauma is like salt in seawater, it doesn't always show. But it's there. Always. Still, that summer, for a while at least, felt like healing. Like something was finally loosening inside them. As if they had pressed pause on a life that had demanded too much. The world beyond the dunes could wait. They were seen often in town. A regular couple, warm, kind, private. Locals remembered them as polite, reserved, always holding hands. Never once did anyone suspect that by the end of that same month, their names would be printed on missing persons flyers. That their story would end not in the comfort of that small, sea-worn house but somewhere far colder. For now though, they were just Jake and Allison. Two people in love. Borrowing time, trying to find something worth keeping. It was a Thursday, the 11th of July, 1996. A thin veil of mist had drifted in overnight, hanging low over the dunes like breath held in suspense. The air smelled of wet sand and driftwood. At the corner cafe, the waitress remembered noticing that table 3 sat empty, longer than usual. Jake and Allison always came in early. Ordered the same thing, scrambled eggs for him. Fruit and toast for her, coffee for both. But that morning, the table stayed clean. No dishes. No names on the check. Just silence, and the low hum of conversation that filled its place. Back at the rental house, nothing looked out of place. The curtains were drawn halfway. The front door was locked from the inside. 2 bicycles leaned against the railing, tires still crusted with yesterday's sand. On the small porch table, a pair of sunglasses rested beside an open paperback, its pages fluttering in the wind. A faint trail of footprints, half erased by breeze and time, led down the steps and toward the beach path, then stopped. Inside, breakfast had been made, but not eaten. 2 plates on the counter, eggs cooling into rubber, toast untouched. A kettle, still warm, sat beside 2 ceramic mugs filled 3/4 with coffee. One of the mugs had a lipstick ring. The other didn't. On the couch lay a light jacket, draped like someone had just slipped it off. A beach towel, damp and slightly sandy, hung over the armrest. The bed was made. No signs of struggle, no broken windows, no forced entry. Nothing missing except Jake and Allison. The owners of the rental didn't think anything of it when the couple didn't return their key that afternoon. Vacationers often ran late. But by evening, when the house remained still and the bikes remained untouched, concern turned into confusion. A call was placed. Not to the police yet, just to the couple's listed number. It rang 6 times before the machine picked up. Jake's voice, calm and measured, "Leave a message." Then the beep, then nothing. By the next morning, the door was unlocked. Not forced, not broken, just quietly, unlatched. As if someone had returned in the night and changed their mind. Locals began to whisper. A town this size doesn't need much to spark a story. Some said they'd gone swimming and never came back. Others swore they saw a man in a tan van near the dunes that same week, parked too long, watching. A few believed they'd run off together, decided not to come back. But the people who knew them, waitresses, shopkeepers, the woman at the grocery store who helped Allison pick out a bottle of wine, none of them believed that. The police came, took photos, wrote their reports, cataloged the items left behind. Shoes neatly by the door, clothes in drawers, a wallet on the nightstand. Allison's journal half filled, open to a page that ended mid-sentence. It didn't look like a scene of panic. It looked like a pause, like life had been gently interrupted. The sea was searched. Helicopters combed the shoreline. Divers swept the shallow coves. Nothing surfaced. No bodies, no belongings, just more sand, more silence. The town held its breath for a while. Then time, as it always does, began to move forward. But the ocean never spoke. And the house waited. Quiet. Watching. As if it too remembered that day the couple vanished, swallowed not with violence but with a kind of terrifying stillness. It began with a single phone call. The owner of the beach rental phoned the sheriff's office late in the evening, her voice brittle with concern. A couple hadn't checked out. Their things were still inside. The bikes hadn't moved. Something wasn't right. She had tried to wait, to believe they were just running behind, that maybe they'd left early and forgotten to lock the door. But the house felt different now. Not just empty, abandoned. Deputies arrived just after sunset. The house greeted them with silence and stale coffee. No signs of forced entry. No overturned furniture. No blood. Just a scene frozen in time. It looked lived in, but without life. Like someone had stepped out mid-conversation and never returned. They took photographs, bagged items, and dusted for prints. Everything matched Jake and Allison. No unknown fingerprints. No foreign DNA. No immediate signs of a crime. The report went out the next morning. 2 missing adults, last seen the 10th of July, 1996. Jake and Allison Dwyer. Caucasian. Married, vacationing on the coast. Described by locals as polite, private, affectionate. No history of mental illness. No signs of financial trouble. No documented conflict. No one who knew them could make sense of it. Flyers were printed in batches of 50. Grainy photographs, stapled to telephone poles. Taped to grocery store windows, handed out at gas stations and diners. Missing bold black letters that faded under the sundae. Their faces became a kind of landmark. People looked, nodded, moved on. Time frayed the edges of the paper, and the story with it. Detectives traced their steps. Interviews were conducted. The cafe owner remembered them smiling. A bartender claimed he'd seen them the night before they vanished drinking wine, slow dancing on the beach. A young couple in love. Nothing alarming. Nothing unusual. Cold calls were made to friends, family, co-workers. Had they mentioned feeling unsafe? Had they talked about running away? Did they have enemies? No, no, and no. Jake's sister said he was the happiest she'd seen him in years. Allison's best friend remembered her writing postcards, excited to return. They had plans. People don't make plans if they're planning to disappear. Bank accounts were checked. Credit cards inactive. No large withdrawals. No transactions beyond the 10th of July. They hadn't packed bags. They hadn't taken their car. Their wallets were still in the rental. Their shoes by the door. Cell phones weren't yet common, just a landline, and it hadn't been used. Their trail ended at the edge of the dunes. Tips came in. Most were useless. A couple spotted in Montana. A pair matching their description seen boarding a ferry in Canada. A man in Nevada claimed Jake had changed his name and moved off-grid. All were investigated. None were credible. The case went cold. Boxes of evidence were stored in a backroom filing cabinet. Polaroids, receipts, reports, personal effects. Every so often, a new detective would take it on, hopeful. Each one left it the same way, unsolved. The house was rented again. The town kept going. The waves never stopped. And still, no one knew what happened that day. Two people simply vanished, not into chaos or violence, but into a silence so total it swallowed every thread the investigators tried to pull. Threads that led nowhere, threads that snapped in their hands. And somewhere beneath the noise of daily life, beneath paperwork and archived interviews, the question lingered like a song only the ocean remembered. How do two people disappear without a trace? Years passed, the way coastal wind passes through dune grass, quiet at first, then relentless. Seasons changed. Summer light gave way to the long gray of Oregon winters. The beach house was rented again and again. Tourists came and went. New names filled the guest book, but somewhere on a shelf in the sheriff's office, a thin case file gathered dust. One of many marked unsolved, but this one felt different. This one felt personal. Jake's mother stopped celebrating his birthday after 1999. She used to bake a cake every year, still bought him a card for a while, signing it with trembling hands and too many ellipses. By the 10th year, she said it felt like she was pretending he was still out there, just so she wouldn't collapse from the weight of not knowing. She would sit by the window in the evenings, listening to the wind, saying it reminded her of the way his voice used to trail off when he was deep in thought. Allison's father, once a stern, stoic man with a love for crossword puzzles and jazz records, began talking to reporters less and less. He stopped answering calls from the detectives. "Call me when you've found something," he said once, not unkindly, just tired. By 2010, his memory had started to fade. When asked about his daughter, he sometimes told stories as if she'd only just left for college, still waiting to come home for Thanksgiving. The detectives aged, too. Officer Brenner, the first to arrive at the rental, retired in 2005. He kept a photo of the couple on the bulletin board above his desk until his last day. They were just gone. He told a local paper during an anniversary feature. Like they'd evaporated. You see murders, you see accidents. But this was different. This was silence. His voice had grown hoarse, more gravel than memory, and when asked what still haunted him, he didn't hesitate. Not knowing, he said. Sometimes, not knowing is worse than knowing. The town grew, changed. New shops opened, old ones closed. People stopped talking about Jake and Allison. Except in whispers, or late at night when the fog rolled in thick, and the beach house lights flickered from the road. Rumors held fast. A killer in hiding. A love pact gone wrong. The ocean took them. The house did. Every 5 years or so, a journalist would take up the story again. Some young writer hoping to solve a decades-old mystery, digging up the same tired facts, interviewing the same grieving faces, walking the same stretch of sand where the footprints once vanished. But time erodes more than just evidence. It wears down people. It dulls memory. Faces blur, voices fade. Pain becomes background noise, distant, almost familiar. Still, the case remained open. Technically, though no one was actively working it anymore. The boxes were moved to the lower shelves. The couple's names became case numbers. The officers who once combed the dunes with flashlights had their own grandchildren now. Those who had known Jake and Allison were aging or gone. And yet, somewhere between the sea and the wind, and the walls of that weather-beaten house, something waited. Not a ghost, not a killer, something quieter. A question, suspended in salt air. A story paused, not ended. Because the truth hadn't surfaced. Not yet. But it was still out there, buried beneath years of silence and missed birthdays. Still out there, waiting to be found. The house had stood through decades of salt and storm, its paint now a faint echo of the crisp white it once was. Shingles curled like brittle paper. The porch creaked under every step, not out of protest, but memory. In 2021, it was no longer the quiet escape it had once been. It had become a novelty rental for city dwellers chasing coastal charm and curated nostalgia. An Airbnb listing described it as a cozy oceanside hideaway, rich with history and character. But it didn't mention what kind of history. The new owner was a tech consultant from Seattle, hoping to flip the place for profit. Coastal properties were booming. The contractor he hired, a man named Leo Markham, had worked on dozens of houses like this, weather-beaten shells with good bones and hidden rot. He arrived with a small crew, tasked with updating plumbing and replacing outdated wiring. It was supposed to be a simple job, a month's work, maybe two. Until the fourth day, Leo had been crawling under the house alone, wedged tight in the space between the foundation and the splintered floorboards above. The air was thick, damp, heavy with decades of dust. He'd expected old pipes, maybe some animal nests. What he didn't expect was the wall. Not part of the blueprint, not visible from outside. A small, crudely sealed partition of plywood and cinder block, tucked behind insulation like someone had gone out of their way to hide it. At first, he thought it was part of an old repair, maybe structural reinforcement. But something about it felt off, makeshift, rushed, concealed rather than constructed. He tapped the boards, hollow, then again, hollow and soft, decaying. He pried one away. What greeted him was not a room, not even a full cavity, just a space, just enough to crawl into, just enough to leave something behind. He didn't scream, not then, just backed out slowly. His breath caught somewhere between his chest and throat. Dirt clung to his clothes. His flashlight trembled in his hand. He crawled backward like a man reversing time, blinking hard, as if disbelief might rewrite what he'd seen. Later, when recounting it to police, his voice would crack. There was something wrapped in cloth, he said. Bones. I saw bones. The 911 call was short, controlled, but fragile. The dispatcher noted his voice as unsteady. The 911 call was short. He just said the words, "I think I found human remains under the house. Please, please send someone." By nightfall, the beach house was cordoned off. Floodlights cast long shadows across the sand. Investigators moved with deliberate care, their faces tight with the realization that something long buried had begun to surface. Forensics teams arrived in silence. No sirens, no fanfare. Just the heavy hum of the ocean and the low murmur of voices trying not to disturb whatever lay beneath. Inside the crawlspace, the discovery was confirmed. Not one body, two, shallow, wrapped, almost mummified by time and salt and cold. The story was no longer about a couple who vanished. It was about a house that remembered. A house that had waited. Waited 25 years to give up its secret. The air beneath the floorboards was colder than expected. Not the kind of cold that drifts in from coastal wind or settling fog, but a denser, stiller chill, one that seemed to hum with the presence of things long hidden. The forensic team moved in measured silence, their gloved hands brushing away layers of dust and compacted earth. Every movement was deliberate. Every inch of uncovered space brought something closer to the surface. Something forgotten. Something that had waited for years beneath the house's foundation like a buried whisper. The crawlspace wasn't large, just wide enough for one person to fit at a time. It smelled of mildew, dry rot, and something faintly sweet and rancid, organic matter broken down by decades. The cloth came first, brittle, grayish, flaking at the edges. Once it may have been clothing, cotton, likely. A dress? A shirt? Now it crumbled like ash under the lightest touch. Then came bone. Not a full skeleton, not yet. Just fragments at first. A curved piece of rib, a shard of jaw. Something like a femur, curled unnaturally as if tucked or forced into place. Someone, years ago, had taken time to seal this space. Not expertly, not like a contractor, but with purpose. The cinder blocks were stacked hastily. No mortar. The plywood was nailed without alignment, as if someone was racing the clock, as if someone needed them to disappear, and fast. Then came the locket. It was discovered wedged beside a splintered floor beam, partially buried in debris. A delicate oval pendant on a tarnished chain. When opened, it revealed no photos, only a small, crumpled piece of yellowed paper, and a single engraving on the back. Always A. The engraving was shallow, almost hesitant, like someone had done it by hand. The kind of message lovers give each other when words feel too heavy to speak aloud. By noon, the scene was swarming with officials. State investigators were called in. The local sheriff, now in his late 60s, stood at the edge of the property, arms folded tight, a deep crease between his eyes that hadn't been there 25 years ago. He remembered the names. Everyone did. Jake and Allison Dwyer. The couple that vanished. The press arrived by sunset. A single tweet had reignited the long-dormant case, and now a white rental home near the Oregon dunes was surrounded by news vans and camera crews. Headlines spread like wildfire. Breaking: human remains discovered beneath rental home, linked to 1996 missing couple case. Satellite trucks lined the street. Reporters knocked on neighboring doors, asking if anyone remembered the Dwyers. Microphones were pushed forward. Some people said they remembered them clearly. Others just wanted their voices on camera. Inside the house, the process of exhumation was careful and excruciating. The remains' two distinct sets were not complete, but enough was there. Enough to tell investigators what they already feared. These were not accidental deaths, not drownings, not disappearances. The remains had been placed here, hidden, left in silence. The locket was sent to the lab. The bones were packaged, labeled, and transported for DNA analysis. For the first time in over 2 decades, the case file marked Jake and Allison Dwyer, missing persons, was pulled from the archive and reopened. A new number, a new category. Not missing. Now, suspected homicide. And still, the ocean whispered just outside. Relentless. Indifferent. As though it, too, had always known what lay beneath the floorboards. The crawlspace yielded more than just bones. As the forensic team sifted through layers of compacted soil and remnants of the past, they found something unexpected, something deeply human. Tucked behind the rusted piping, protected by a warped tin box, nearly sealed shut with corrosion, lay a collection of personal effects untouched since 1996. The contents were small, fragile, and heavy with memory. A time capsule, not crafted for nostalgia, but sealed by necessity, or maybe desperation. The journal was the first thing they lifted out. Bound in faded blue leather, its edges curled and eaten by damp, the pages swollen and stained from years underground. But inside, between the watermarks and mold, handwriting remained looped and delicate. Allison's, based on comparisons to old letters her family had kept. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense. Not a space for deep introspection or rambling thoughts. It read more like a travelogue, a catalog of their days by the sea. Breakfast at the corner cafe, a hike up the northern bluff, Jake attempting to cook pasta and nearly setting off the smoke alarm. Each entry simple, almost mundane. But in the stillness of hindsight, those details felt sacred. Then the tone shifted. The last few pages, written in increasingly hurried script, spoke of unease, of feeling watched, of hearing footsteps outside the house at night. Allison wrote about the porch swing moving when there was no wind, of someone knocking once on the back door and then vanishing into the dark. She told herself it was nothing, that she was being dramatic, that Jake said it was just the ocean playing tricks. But the final entry ended abruptly, mid-sentence. "I don't think I'm just imagining it anymore. Last night, Jake." And then the page was blank, smeared, as if the pen had been dropped. Alongside the journal were Polaroids, the color still remarkably vivid despite the years. The photos showed Jake and Allison walking the beach, their arms around each other, laughing. One captured Allison mid-spin, hair caught in the wind, eyes squinting against the Sunday. Another showed Jake standing on the porch steps, raising a glass toward the camera. It was dated the 10th of July, the day before they vanished. Each image now looked like something sacred. Frozen moments on the edge of an ending no one saw coming. Then there was the postcard. Torn at the corner, creased but legible. Addressed to Allison's best friend in Seattle. The handwriting was neat, precise, full of warmth. "This place is beautiful, quiet, peaceful in a way I didn't know I needed. Jake's already talking about coming back next year. I think we're finally learning how to exhale." It hadn't been stamped, hadn't been mailed. It was waiting perhaps for a walk to the post office that never happened. These artifacts weren't just evidence. They were fragments of a life interrupted, a map of final days. They added texture to the outlines investigators had clung to for decades. No longer just names in a file. Jake and Allison re-emerged in these pages and pictures. As people, as lovers, as two souls clinging to peace after pain. The journal, the photographs, the postcard, each item pulsed with the quiet ache of lives that never finished their story. For detectives, it was the beginning of something new. A trail, faint but finally visible. For the families, it was both agony and answer. Proof of presence, proof that they hadn't simply walked into the ocean and disappeared. And for the house, it was confession. An unburial, not just of bones, but of memory. Of grief sealed in earth, waiting for hands to finally dig deep enough to touch the truth. When the journal was taken into evidence, it was treated like a relic, carefully dried, gently unfolded page by page, its ink scanned and enhanced under ultraviolet light. Forensics prioritized DNA and fingerprints, but to the detectives assigned to the reopened case, it was the words that mattered most. This wasn't a document. It was a voice, speaking across 25 years of silence. It was the only witness left who could speak freely. The early entries read like something from a couple deeply in love and newly married, leaning into their first quiet days of solitude after the whirlwind of planning, vows, and life back in the city. Allison's handwriting curved neatly along the lines. She wrote about Jake humming while he cooked, about watching storms roll in from the porch, about how time seemed to slow on the coast. Jake's contributions were rare, but deliberate short notes scribbled in the margins, little asides that added color to her thoughts. "She beat me at cards again." Or "She looks beautiful when the tide's low." They painted a picture of warmth, intimacy, and the shared joy of stillness. It was healing, it was tender, it was ordinary in the most sacred way. But then the tone shifted. Gradually at first, a new kind of silence crept into the entries, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that fills the gaps when something begins to go wrong. One night, Allison wrote about finding her sweater missing, not misplaced, gone. She remembered laying it over the porch railing to dry after their walk. In the morning, it wasn't there. Jake suggested the wind had taken it. Allison wasn't convinced. She didn't say so directly, but between the lines of her writing there was something else: hesitation, unease, the suggestion that she no longer trusted the calm that had once comforted her. Then came Jake's notes. No longer lighthearted or playful, they grew terse. Descriptive, specific. He mentioned seeing a man near the edge of the dunes twice. First during a sunset walk, just a figure standing alone in the distance. Then again the next morning, this time closer. Tall, unshaven, wearing a heavy coat despite the warmth. Jake had tried not to alarm Allison. He only wrote it down because, in his words, I need to keep track, just in case. The entries became more fragmented. Allison mentioned waking to creaks in the floorboards at night. The porch swing moved when there was no wind. A noise outside the kitchen window, soft, scraping. Jake wrote of strange tire tracks near their bikes, tracks that hadn't been there the day before. Their pictures stopped, their walks shortened. She described feeling watched. The last entry was rushed. Allison's handwriting trembled across the page, letters uneven and sharp. She wrote about hearing someone outside the bedroom window. Jake had gone out to check, but didn't find anything. Still, she felt something was wrong. I told him we should leave early. He said we'll talk about it in the morning. But I don't want to wait. I don't want. That's where it ended. Mid-sentence, ink pooled at the edge of the line, as if the pen had been dropped. There was no next page, just blank space. To investigators, it wasn't just eerie. It was a shift from speculation to implication. A narrative left just before the climax, proof that fear had arrived before whatever came next. What was most chilling wasn't the presence of danger. It was the way it arrived quietly, like a shadow stretching slowly across a room, unnoticed until it swallowed the light completely. The journal, once a reflection of peace, had become a record of erosion of safety, of trust, of time. And the last voice it held wasn't looking for escape. It was sounding an alarm that no one heard until it was too late. The reopening of the Dwyer case in 2021 stirred the town in ways it hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't just the media frenzy or the flashing lights outside the house, it was the past returning with weight. Familiar names suddenly on everyone's lips again. Familiar faces now seen in yellowed photographs and police files, not cafes or corner stores. As investigators combed through archival interviews and sought out long-forgotten voices, something unexpected began to happen. People started remembering. The first call came from a woman named Elsie Grant. 82 now. She had lived just 3 houses down from the rental in 1996. Back then, she was newly widowed and spent most of her time tending to her rose garden and watching the sea from her sunroom. She told officers that sometime during that July, though she couldn't pinpoint the exact date, she noticed a tan van parked along the side of the road near the dunes. Not every day, but often. Always in the same spot. Always facing the beach. It wasn't the van itself that caught her attention, but the man inside. She remembered him sitting very still in the driver's seat, windows cracked, never getting out. She could see the glint of binoculars resting on the dashboard, and once, she thought she saw him lift them to his eyes, not toward the ocean, but toward the rental house. She couldn't make out his features, just that he was tall, had a thick beard, and always wore a cap pulled low. At the time, she chalked it up to someone birdwatching. Harmless. But now, she wasn't so sure. The second account came from Teresa Navarro, a waitress at the coastal diner where Jake and Allison had eaten nearly every morning. In 1996, Teresa had been 21 and working the morning shift, still living at home and saving up for community college. She remembered the couple clearly. They were sweet, she told detectives. Quiet. Always sat by the window. He was more reserved. She was the one who always smiled. But what stood out, what she hadn't told police back then because no one asked, was what happened 2 days before they vanished. Allison came in alone. It was late afternoon, well past the breakfast rush, and Teresa had been restocking sugar packets when the bell above the door rang. Allison walked in quickly, her hair messy, her eyes red. She didn't order food, just sat at the counter and asked for a glass of water. When Teresa brought it to her, she noticed Allison's hands were shaking. "I asked if she was okay," Teresa recalled, her voice tightening. She didn't really answer, just said something like, "I think we should leave, something feels off here." Teresa didn't press. She figured it was a personal issue, maybe a fight with Jake. But now, thinking back, she remembered how Allison kept glancing toward the windows, as if checking to make sure no one had followed her. Neither Elsie nor Teresa had gone to the police in 1996. Why would they? There was no crime yet. Just strange observations, fragments of unease. But now, those fragments were beginning to form something bigger, a shape in the dark that had gone unseen. The Watcher. A man in a van, a woman in distress, a town that never imagined danger could be hiding in the quiet. It wasn't enough to convict anyone, but it was enough to know this: Jake and Allison hadn't vanished into the sea. They had been seen, and someone had been watching. When the case was reopened, the investigative team was handed not just a mystery, but a ghost trail: thin paper files, aging photographs, and reports scribbled in handwriting from another era. Most of the officers who had worked the original disappearance were long retired, and much of the evidence had either degraded or disappeared. Boxes were mislabeled, interview tapes unspooled into static. Still, one name surfaced in a marginal note buried in the supplemental file: Vincent Shore. At the time, Shore was just another face in the background noise of transient movement up and down the Oregon coast. He had no known address, no family who claimed him. He drifted from motel to rest stop to back alley, picking up odd jobs and sleeping wherever the ground was soft. In August of 1996, just 3 weeks after Jake and Allison vanished, he had been arrested for trespassing on a private dock in Tillamook, 20 miles north of the beach rental. He was found sleeping beneath a covered boat with a backpack full of pilfered groceries and a rusted hunting knife. His record showed nothing violent: petty theft, loitering, one instance of indecent exposure. The kind of man who was noticed and forgotten in equal measure. The note in the file came from a young officer at the time, Officer Dana Fields, who'd written, "Subject bears resemblance to individual seen loitering near coastal rentals in early July, no link found." Released the 12th of August, 2096. That was it. One line. No interview transcript, no follow-up. The man was booked, processed, and let go. Just one more drifter in a summer full of them. But in 2021, what the original investigation lacked in manpower and foresight, modern forensics began to make up for in silence. Inside the crawl space, among the cloth fragments and bone, the forensic team had recovered a half-buried glass bottle, amber, narrow-necked, the kind used for cough syrup or spirits. It was old, fogged from years underground, but it had a screw-top lid still mostly intact, and beneath that lid, on the inside rim of the glass, a fingerprint, smudged, partial, but viable. They ran it through the national database. Nothing came back. But an enterprising analyst expanded the search, combing through archived physical records not yet digitized. And there it was. A single, dusty fingerprint card from the Tillamook County Sheriff's Department, Vincent Shore, dated the 2nd of August, 1996. The print was a match. No one could say how the bottle ended up under the floorboards. No one could place Shore at the rental, officially. But someone had handled that bottle, sealed it, left it buried with the bodies, and that someone was now dead. Vincent Shore had passed away in 2017, in a shelter outside Sacramento. Natural causes: heart failure. No known next of kin. He died a nobody. A footnote. But in the reopened Dwyer case, he became something else. The closest thing to a suspect the investigation had ever found. The detectives pored through what little could be recovered. No photographs, no formal statements. Just vague mentions from shopkeepers and beachgoers who recalled a man who didn't belong. A man who loitered, who watched, who left no impression except discomfort. No one had seen him with Jake or Allison. No one could tie him directly to the night they vanished. But there he was, a fingerprint buried beneath their home, a ghost hiding in plain sight. And somehow, for 25 years, no one had thought to ask where he was, the week the ocean swallowed 2 people whole. When the task force assembled to re-examine the Dwyer case, began reconstructing the original investigation, it didn't take long for cracks to surface. Not subtle ones, either gaping fractures that exposed the frailty of a system built on limited resources, exhausted officers, and a deep belief that nothing truly dark could happen in a town so small. In 1996, the Sheriff's Department was operating with a skeleton crew. No homicide division, no forensic lab of its own. Cases were triaged by urgency, and disappearances, especially those lacking signs of violence, were often treated more like inconveniences than emergencies. The disappearance of Jake and Allison was puzzling, yes, but there were no bloodstains, no forced entry, no clear motive. The working theory leaned toward voluntary absence. Perhaps they left to start over. Perhaps they drowned. Perhaps it was nothing more than a tragic accident. In hindsight, that assumption was the first mistake. Not because it was impossible, but because it made everything that followed slower, softer, and more easily dismissed. The original search lasted 4 days. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, questioned locals, flew a helicopter over the coastline. When nothing turned up, the case was downgraded. Leads were pursued sporadically. The crime scene, if it was a crime scene, was never fully secured. By the time investigators realized the couple hadn't left on their own, too much had already been washed away. And then there was Vincent Shore. In the revised timeline, Shore had been within walking distance of the Dwyer rental for at least a week leading up to their disappearance. He had been detained less than a month later for trespassing, interviewed briefly, and then released. The same man who would later be connected to their home through a fingerprint left under their floorboards beside their remains was logged and dismissed without further inquiry. Why? The reasons were simple and infuriating. Shore had no violent record. He had no connection to the couple. And he was a drifter, the kind of man who passed through unnoticed, unclaimed, and unmissed. The note referencing him was scribbled in the margin of a supplemental report, not even indexed properly in the case file. And when Officer Dana Fields tried to bring him up again during a later shift change, her supervisor allegedly told her, "We don't have the time or budget to chase shadows." It wasn't neglect in the cinematic sense, no corruption, no bribes, no sinister cover-up. It was something quieter, apathy, underestimation. The slow bleed of attention away from what didn't scream for it. Shore didn't look like a killer, the couple didn't look like victims, and the house didn't look like a tomb. Detectives now speak of the case with a kind of solemn regret. One called it a textbook failure of follow-through. Another, in a closed-door debrief, reportedly said, "We had him. He was right there." Right there. That's what haunts the case now, not just the horror of what was done, but the knowledge that someone saw the edges of it and chose to look away. That if the right person had asked one more question, if one more photo had been taken, if one more day had been spent on that crawl space, instead of assuming the couple had simply left, then maybe, just maybe, they would have been found in time. But they weren't. And now, the record holds a different kind of truth. Not one of mystery, but of failure. Not only did the house keep it secret, so did the people sworn to uncover it. Vincent Shore's name had been nothing more than a faint echo in the original investigation. Just another drifter, just another set of footprints that washed away with the tide. But once his fingerprint surfaced from that amber glass bottle beneath the floorboards of the Dwyer house, everything changed. The man who had once slipped through the cracks of a sleepy coastal town's limited police force was suddenly recast not as a wanderer, but as a shadow following the edges of other people's lives. The kind of man you forget until it's too late to remember. The deeper investigators dug, the more unsettling the pattern became. Shore's name had shown up in at least 3 states between 1992 and 2004, Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. His crimes, until now, had always been deemed minor: trespassing, illegal camping, disorderly conduct, arrested, processed, released. He never stayed long in one place. A motel here, a trailer park there, sometimes a short-term rental under a fake name. He moved along the coast like the tide itself, never in one place for long, always close to water. But there were darker alignments too. In 1993, in a small Washington beach town, a couple reported a break-in at their vacation cabin. Nothing was taken, but the woman said she felt watched for days beforehand. The local police found signs of forced entry, just a single window pane, cracked and reopened, but no fingerprints, no leads. The case was closed as a random incident. In 1997, just a year after the Dwyers vanished, another woman traveling alone disappeared from a seaside rental in Northern California. Her name was Lila Parks, 31, a school teacher on summer break. Her belongings were left behind, her car still parked in the driveway. The local paper ran a short story, but the case never made national news. Lila was marked as a missing person, and eventually, another cold case. Now, with the benefit of time and technology, digital analysts were able to cross-reference vehicle registrations, local police blotters, and witness descriptions. In both towns, just days or weeks before the disappearances, a tan van had been seen. Boxy, old, unmarked. In both towns, a man was reported loitering near beachside homes, sometimes watching from the dunes. Descriptions varied, but common threads remained: tall, unshaven, quiet. Often wore a cap pulled low. And in both places, buried in the back pages of police reports, was the name Vincent Shore. Never a suspect, never pursued, always dismissed. In 2008, Shore was arrested one last time, this time in Oregon again, loitering near a state campground. He told officers he was passing through. The arresting officer described him as cooperative, but vague, almost like someone playing a character. He gave a false name. The truth came out only during booking. He was released days later due to overcrowding and lack of charges. By 2017, Vincent Shore was living out of a trailer behind a gas station on the outskirts of Sacramento. He died quietly in his sleep. The coroner's report listed heart failure, likely brought on by years of untreated hypertension and alcohol abuse. No one claimed the body. His belongings were few: some clothes, a radio, and a box of old receipts. No journals, no confessions, no final words. Justice, in the traditional sense, would never come. There would be no trial, no cross-examination, no verdict read aloud in a courtroom. Shore had already vanished, this time into death. He left behind no answers, only a widening trail of questions that now pointed to more than just one couple, more than one house. He had moved like smoke, leaving behind nothing solid. No fingerprints except one, no footprints except the ones that had been ignored. The story of Vincent Shore wasn't that of a criminal genius or a master manipulator. It was something more terrifying. A man who slipped through the cracks simply because no one thought he mattered. And in that space between oversight and apathy, he did what no one stopped him from doing. Again and again. It was a forensic technician, not an investigator, who finally opened the locket. The chain had been found tangled in debris beneath the crawl space, its clasp corroded, the pendant itself dull with years of moisture and neglect. Most thought it was merely sentimental, a piece of jewelry buried with the victims. perhaps worn by Allison in her final days. But inside, beneath a thin film of rust and dirt, was something no one had expected. A folded scrap of paper, yellowed, creased, so delicate it nearly tore when touched. Under magnification and careful handling, the message revealed itself. Just 6 words, written in smudged blue ink. "We tried, we really did." It was all that was written. No date, no names, no explanation. But the paper's edges were frayed. The ink had bled from exposure to time and moisture, and the handwriting, after careful comparison to Jake Dwyer's letters recovered from family keepsakes, was a match. The words hit differently than evidence usually does. This wasn't a fingerprint or a timeline. It was a whisper from the past, a plea, a confession, a farewell. Written, perhaps, in the dark, with trembling hands. Slipped into a locket that once might have held a photograph, now transformed into a vessel for the only truth Jake could leave behind. The message, haunting in its simplicity, changed the trajectory of the investigation. For years, the prevailing theory had been sudden disappearance. An ambush, a murder carried out swiftly. But now, forensic pathologists reconsidered. The position of the remains. The condition of the clothing. The bindings, once too degraded to fully analyze, were found embedded with tiny splinters from the house's own stair rail cut, perhaps from the banisters. There were signs of bruising on the bone, not sharp trauma. Compression marks on the wrists and ankles. It told a different story. They hadn't been killed immediately. They had been held, likely inside the house, for days. The crawlspace, once thought to be a post-mortem hiding place, was now seen as the final stop in a slow, suffocating ordeal. Experts believe the killer may have occupied the house while they were restrained, or returned to it. Perhaps even watched from the dunes, waiting for the town to turn its head before moving in. The message in the locket suggested awareness, consciousness, a shared understanding between the two of them that they were not going to escape, but that they had tried, that they had resisted, that whatever quiet end had come was not one they welcomed. The heartbreak of it wasn't just in the content of the note, but in its restraint. 6 words, no self-pity, no blame, just the weight of defeat, crystallized and carried in a token of love. Jake had taken what time he had left to say what he could. He must have known someone might find it someday. Or maybe not. Maybe he just needed to say it for himself. For her? To leave behind a sliver of truth in a house that would spend decades pretending nothing had happened at all. The locket was returned to the family, though they didn't speak to the press. The note itself remains in evidence. Preserved, scanned, held in a case file now marked with a new category. Homicide confirmed. But more than that, it served as the only known communication from the victims after their disappearance. A single, brief transmission from the shadows of captivity. A glimpse into their final hours. And in those 6 words, we tried. We really did. It was the story of a struggle no one witnessed, and the proof that even in their last moments, they hadn't given up. Not entirely. Not until they had nothing left to say. Long before the bones were unearthed, long before the news vans arrived and the headlines reclaimed the names, Jake and Allison Dwyer, the house had already become a quiet legend. Not in a dramatic, ghost story sense. There were no tales of doors slamming shut on their own, no apparitions in the mirrors, just a persistent, creeping uneasy feeling, as tenants often described it, of being watched. It wasn't the kind of thing people put in reviews. The rental listing remained mostly untouched for years, passed between owners who saw it as a modest income property, perched neatly near the dunes, and just a short walk from the beach. The price stayed lower than most. The bookings were frequent but short. More than one renter canceled before the weekend ended. Some blamed the weather or an emergency back home. Others simply said they didn't sleep well there, that the nights felt long, that the walls felt too thin. A family who stayed during the summer of 2007, described the house as weirdly silent. Not quiet silent. Like the air didn't carry sound properly. The father remembered waking up in the middle of the night, certain that someone was moving downstairs. He grabbed a flashlight, crept through the house, and found nothing. But when he returned to bed, he realized he'd left his shoes on the porch, and now they were gone. He thought it was a prank, his children messing with him. The shoes turned up the next day, back on the porch, neatly placed, slightly damp. Another tenant, a single woman writing a novel, stayed for a month in the off-season. She left after 9 days. In an online forum years later, she wrote about feeling a heaviness in the house. She said it felt like she was intruding on someone else's space, like she was being tolerated but not welcomed. She never told the property manager why she left. She just packed her bags and drove back to Portland without saying goodbye. The odd thing, locals say, is that the house didn't look haunted. There was no broken gate, no overgrown yard. It had the same weathered charm as every other cottage on that stretch of coast. But people knew. They spoke of it in hushed tones, especially at night. Teenagers dared each other to get close to it on foggy evenings, swearing they felt cold spots near the windows. Some claimed to hear faint knocking inside when the house stood empty. Most chalked it up to the wind, but not everyone believed that. Was it trauma embedded in the walls? The kind of psychic residue that clings to wood and foundation after violence has occurred? Or was it something deeper, something born not from ghosts but from silence? A kind of grief that echoed even when no one was listening? After the remains were found, those who'd once stayed there began connecting the dots. The strange dreams, the restless sleep, the feeling of not being alone. It was all there, just beneath the surface. They hadn't known what had happened in that house, but they had felt it. Somehow, the truth had seeped into the floors, into the air, into the bones of the place itself. And even now, with the case reopened and the story brought into light, the unease hasn't lifted. Because hauntings aren't always spectral. Sometimes they're made of memory, of dread unspoken, of footsteps no one hears but still feel. The kind that don't scream or scare, but simply stay. The kind that don't leave. When the news reached the families, it didn't arrive like thunder. It came quietly. A phone call from a detective. A knock on the door from someone now grayer than when they first spoke in 1996. There was no dramatic moment of collapse, no camera-ready reaction. Just a long-held breath finally being let go, and the unbearable weight of what filled the silence afterward. Jake's sister, Maren, was the first to speak to the press. Not because she wanted to, but because she felt she had to. She had kept Jake's photograph in a frame above her fireplace for 25 years, dusted weekly, its glass cleaned but never moved. Her voice trembled as she spoke, not from surprise, but from the exhaustion of waiting. We always knew something terrible happened. But knowing it, finally, doesn't make it easier. It just changes the shape of the grief. But later, alone by the edge of the sea, she folded in on herself as if her bones could no longer hold the weight. Allison's father, George Lane, said very little. He hadn't spoken publicly since the 5th year of their disappearance, when he begged anyone with information to come forward during a local news segment. He had once been a strong man, his shoulders square, his voice firm, a presence you couldn't ignore. But time had worn him thin. When detectives showed him the locket, he stared at it for a long time. Then he placed it gently in the center of the table and said, almost absently, "That's her handwriting." She wrote, small, like her mother. He didn't say much after that. Not during the meeting. Not during the press conference. Not at the beach, where the family gathered privately to scatter a handful of dried petals into the surf. He stood at the water's edge with his hands in his pockets, eyes lost somewhere between the horizon and a memory. Closure was a word used often in the reports, but for those who had lived with the absence, it felt like a cheap stand-in for something more complicated. What they were given wasn't closure. It was confirmation. Yes, their children had died. Yes, they had suffered. Yes, someone had done this to them, and yes, that someone would never face justice. The families didn't speak of justice much. Not anymore. That ship had sailed long ago. What they grieved wasn't only the loss of Jake and Allison. It was the years between the birthdays missed, the conversations never had, the life events quietly swallowed so as not to reignite the pain. The beach where it all began looked the same, wind-tossed, wild, beautiful. But if you stood still long enough, you could feel it, the hush. The way the waves broke softer near the dune path. The way the grass leaned inward, always inward, like it remembered the way two sets of footprints once led toward the water and never came back. Locals placed flowers by the fence line that faced the house. Someone left a photo, printed in grainy black and white, of Jake and Allison smiling. Underneath it, a handwritten note. "You mattered. We never stopped looking." They had vanished, yes, but now they had returned in fragments, in stories, in the ache of those left behind. And though their voices had been quieted long ago, the echoes of their lives still moved through the town, the beach, and the people who had never forgotten them. The sea gave up its secret, but the shore remembered everything. The demolition was scheduled for early spring, a decision made quietly by the new property owners, who had long since abandoned any plans of renovation. Too many stories clung to the bones of the place. Too many questions, too much history no one wanted to live with. The house had become a monument to absence, silent, weather-worn, and impossible to ignore. Its presence was a wound, and some believed that tearing it down might finally allow it to heal. Word spread fast. By the morning, the machines arrived. A crowd had already gathered along the street and dune path. Some came out of curiosity, others for closure. A few brought folding chairs and watched like it was an event, but most stood quietly, hands tucked in coat pockets, eyes fixed on the house that had become both myth and memory. The old cottage looked smaller than people remembered. Maybe it had always been that way, just a modest frame of wood and nails, but time had inflated its presence into something larger. Its windows were boarded now, its paint peeled to gray. Wind rattled loose shingles. The porch sagged, as if the structure itself had grown tired of standing. At 9:03 a.m., the first blow came. A backhoe pressed its metal arm into the roof, splitting it open like a shell. Wood cracked, glass shattered, dust rose in plumes. Some people turned away. Others filmed on their phones. One woman, no one knew her name, began to cry quietly as the walls gave way. Not for the house, but for what it had held. For what it had hidden. For what it had become. As the hours passed, the skeleton of the home was reduced to splinters and rubble. By afternoon, only the foundation remained concrete, etched with time and weather. Someone laid flowers at the edge of it. Another placed a photograph, laminated against the rain. It showed Jake and Allison standing on the beach, their arms linked, wind in their hair, both looking toward the camera with expressions that now felt unbearably distant. A child asked his mother why people were sad about a house being torn down. She knelt beside him, spoke softly. No one else could hear her answer. The memorial came together slowly, almost instinctively. A ring of beach stones, a wooden cross carved by hand. Candles in jars, pieces of driftwood inscribed with names and years. Not just Jake and Allison's words, but others' disappearances from the region, unsolved losses, echoes of grief that had never quite settled. By sunset, the tide had begun to rise. Waves reached the edge of the sand where the memorial stood. One candle flickered and went out, the flowers bent with the wind. People began to leave, walking quietly back toward town, their footsteps soft against the damp ground. And still, the sea moved in. It didn't rush, it crept, it touched the stones, it lapped at the edges of memory, claiming not out of cruelty, but rhythm. Nature has no interest in justice, only in return. only in the endless motion of taking, leaving, and taking again. The house was gone, the people were gone. But for a while longer, the memorial remained fragile, makeshift, sacred. And then, as dusk fell and the ocean pulled in its breath, the waves began to carry it away. The tide rolls in, soft and steady, brushing the shore with the same rhythm it has always known. Grains of sand tumble under the weight of the waves, then scatter as the water retreats, like memories too delicate to hold. The beach is empty again, just as it was that morning in July, decades ago. The sky is low, painted in silver and ash. The wind carries the scent of salt and the sound of gulls circling high overhead, their calls distant, indifferent. There are no footsteps in the sand today, no bicycles resting by the path, no flickering candlelight from a cottage window. The house is gone now, returned to silence. In its place, only dunes remain, and beyond them, the endless ocean still, watchful, unmoved. For years, it kept the truth beneath its breath. While flyers faded, while voices fell silent, while names slipped from the headlines and into memory, the sea held fast. It swallowed evidence, it blurred timelines, it wore down the edges of every clue until only whispers remained. And yet, it never truly forgot. The ocean does not erase, it stores. In July of 1996, a couple disappeared without a trace. That was the story, once. A cold fact, repeated in missing persons reports and fading newsprint. A couple went on vacation and were never seen again. No witnesses, no signs of violence, no bodies. Just two people folded into the mist and silence of the Oregon coast. But now the trace has returned. Not in full, not clearly, not enough to name every shadow or fill in every blank space, but enough to know they did not vanish into myth, that they were real, that they were here, that they tried, that someone watched, that someone chose. That silence was not absence, but a cover. The fingerprint, the locket, the journal, the final message. It's not justice, it's not resolution, but it is recognition. A quiet reassembly of the fragments they left behind, spoken aloud in courtrooms of memory and shared grief. The story of Jake and Allison Dwyer does not end with their disappearance. It ends with them being found, even if too late to save them, even if too late to stop what was done. It ends with the uncovering, the remembering, the telling. Some believe the ocean gave back what it could out of mercy. Others think it was timing, or chance, or simply the nature of secrets to rise eventually, like bones beneath shifting sand. But in the final stillness of the shore, where wind meets water and the world holds its breath, it's hard not to imagine the sea itself carrying memory like a tide rolling in, retreating, returning again. The beach is quiet now, no police tape, no flashing lights, just the hum of the wind and the endless rhythm of waves. But something has shifted. The silence is no longer hollow, because part of the story is known. Because the ocean, after all this time, has whispered part of its secret back,